What is going on, guys? This is Crozen, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 companion build. This time we are finally on Wyll, and with Wyll, I feel like he just works best as a pure fiend warlock. Pure warlocks are essentially the kings of versatility, so they're a lot like a bard, except the fact that they also have eldritch blast, so they can basically blast enemies, then go right into melee. They also have very good AoE attacks with Fireball, and they also have very good CC spells with Hunger of Hadar. So they have so many good things going for them that they are really the jack of all trades. And then they also work out very well in honor mode, simply because that extra attack that you get from a paladin or from a bard will not stack with Pact of the Blade from a warlock. So it basically evens it out where the multi-classes will not be that much stronger than just going with a pure warlock. So it's a great build for versatility and a build that I had a lot of fun with. So let's take a look at it. So beginning with our starting class and our ability points, we're obviously going to start out as a warlock with the fiend subclass. For our ability points, one ability is going to be significant versus the rest, and that is Charisma. Since we're going to scale all of our damage with Charisma, we want to go up to 17 with this. We're going to get this to 18 with our first feat. From there, I go with 16 Dexterity for the Initiative and the Armor class, 14 Constitution for our concentration spells, 10 Wisdom, and then I lower Strength and Intelligence down to 8. For the skill proficiencies, you could pick whatever you want here. I just go with Deception and Intimidation since the rest are all -1s. And then for our cantrips, we're going to go with the king of cantrips, and that will be Eldritch Blast. And we're also going to pick up Friends here, as this is a very nice ability for charisma checks. And then for our spells, I like to go with Armor of Agathis and Hex. So initially what you're going to do early on in the game is use Hex a lot. So you're going to cast this as a bonus action and then go right into your Eldritch Blast. And then once you hit about level 5, that's when you're going to start using Hex less. And then as you reach level 8 and we start unlocking our dual wielding abilities, we're going to completely abandon Hex and start using our weapon attack instead. And that is how we're going to start our character. So now we could go through our level path all the way up to level 12. And so we do get an additional spell at level 2. For this one, you might as well just pick up Command, as this is a Fiend Warlock special. And then we also have Eldritch Invocations that we can unlock as we progress all the way up to level 12. So at level 2, I like to go for Agonizing Blast. This way we get extra damage on our Eldritch Blast. And then I also go for Armor of Shadows here, since we will primarily be wearing nothing but robes with this build. So with Armor of Shadows, we will be able to cast Mage Armor without expending a spell slot, which means that we can get some very high armor class, even just wearing robes, simply because we have a high dexterity with this build. At level 3, we will get an additional spell, and for this spell, I like to go with Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray isn't going to be that useful later on in the game, but at level 3, it's going to deal more damage than Eldritch Blast simply because it has 3 rays of fire, whereas Eldritch Blast only has 1 beam currently. So when you combine this with Hex, you can actually get some very good damage with Scorching Ray. But again, you only have 2 Warlock spell slots, so you can't really use this too often, not as much as Eldritch Blast, but it's a very good early game spell. And then we also get access to Pact Boon, and what we want to do for this is go with Pact of the Blade. That way we can basically bind our Pact weapon in our main hand, and we can get it to scale off of Charisma. At level 4, we will get our first feat, and what we want to do for this feat is go for Actor. This will give us a +1 to Charisma, so now we will have 18 Charisma, and it will also give us a proficiency bonus with performance checks. And this is going to be useful for a certain weapon that we're going to use with this build once we get into Act 3. So we do get an additional cantrip. You can either select Mage Hand or Minor Illusion here, and then we get an additional spell. I like to go with Misty Step. That way you have very good movement with teleportation. So now that we hit level 5, we do get access to the Deepen Pact class feature, which means that we will gain an extra attack with our Pact weapon in our main hand. So the melee part of this build will start to become more online at level 5, and we do get access to an additional spell, and this is arguably the best spell for warlocks in the game, and that is Hunger of Hadar. Hunger of Hadar is basically an AoE crowd control spell where it will blind enemies and it will also slow them down with difficult terrain. The good thing about Hunger of Hadar is you could basically stack AoE crowd control effects on top of it. So if you have another party member that has access to spike growth or plant growth, you can put that over top of Hunger of Hadar, and that will slow the enemies down even more. You could even stack Sleet Storm or Ice Storm on top of Hunger of Hadar as well. So it's a very good spell that just works wonders when you have another party member that can add another AoE crowd control effect on top of that. And then we also get Eldritch Invocations, and what we want to do for our Eldritch Invocation here is go for Repelling Blast. Not only will Repelling Blast be very useful for pushing enemies off of cliffs into the abyss, but you can also push enemies back into your Hunger of Hadar and keep them in that AoE crowd control effect blinded. So it's a very good Eldritch Invocation that starts to really become online at level 5 when you unlock Hunger of Hadar. At level 6, we get a new subclass feature with Dark One's Own Luck, which lets you add a 1d10 to an ability check, so it can be useful in certain scenarios, and we do get an additional spell, one spell that makes things go boom with Fireball. Fireball is unique to the Fiend Warlock, and you could also cast this into your Hunger of Hadar, and it's a very good AoE damaging spell, where the more enemies that you have, the greater the impact this becomes. So now that we're level 7, we do get an additional spell and Eldritch Invocation. You don't really have too many good Eldritch Invocations at this point that you can go for, except for maybe Devil's Sight. Devil's Sight will allow you to see normally in darkness, both magical and non-magical, so it can work out really well with the darkness spell, and if you do have a whole bunch of party members that are going to be basically trying to exploit darkness, then this can work out pretty well for you. The problem is Devil's Sight won't do much for Hunger of Hadar, so this is only beneficial for the darkness spell. At level 8, we will get our second feat, and what I like to do for this feat is go for Dual Wielder. This should be around the time when you should be near the end of Act 2, so you should be able to get the Infernal Rapier, which is basically Wyll's Rapier. So you can put this in your offhand and still get it to scale off of Charisma, while having your main hand weapon binded using Bind Pact Weapon, which means that both your main and offhand are going to scale off of Charisma, which is amazing. And then we do get an additional spell. What I like to do for this spell is go with Hold Person, just to add an additional CC spell that can be upcasted. At level 9, we do get new spells as well as new Eldritch Invocations. For the spell, I like to go with Fire Shield here. We will be picking up Counterspell soon, as well as Hold Monster. I just like to hold off on Counterspell until we get an additional spell slot. And then for Eldritch Invocations, we're going to go with Minions of Chaos. This basically allows you to cast Conjure Elemental, so we will be using a Fire Elemental because it fits the vibe of a Fiend Warlock, and a Fire Elemental can cast a mini Fireball, which is pretty fun. At level 10, we get a new subclass action, which is Fiendish Resilience, and this is a super powerful class action because you can choose any damage type and become resistant to it. So if you are going up against a boss or any type of enemy and you don't know what type of damage they do until the fight, you can actually use Fiendish Resilience mid-fight and become resistant to that type of damage. We also get an additional cantrip and spell, so if you did pick up Mage Hand earlier, you can go for Minor Illusion now. And then for the spell, I like to go with Hold Monster here. This is going to be very useful for those enemies that you can't paralyze with Hold Person. At level 11, we do unlock our third Warlock spell, so this is the level that I finally like to pick up Counterspell. That way, if we do use Counterspell in a fight, we will still have access to 2 spell slots that we can use for offensive spells. And then we also pick up Mystic Arcanum at level 11, and it gives us the option to choose between a few level 6 spells. Most of these aren't going to be that great though. You can make a case for Create Undead, but I personally don't see this as a spell that Wyll would use, so I go for Eye Bite here. And basically Eye Bite will give you another CC spell that you can use once per long rest and put an enemy to sleep, which is mostly what you're going to be using this for. And finally, at level 12, we get a lot of good benefits here. For one, we get an additional spell. With this spell, you can choose whatever you want at this point. None of them are really going to be staples for this build. I personally just choose Wall of Fire, but you can go for Cone of Cold, Flame Strike, Cloud of Daggers, or if you really wanted to, Hellish Rebuke here. And then we do get a very powerful Eldritch Invocation with Life Drinker. And basically what Life Drinker will do is it will add additional necrotic damage to your Charisma modifier. So it's going to be so useful because we're going to have a lot of attacks because we are dual wielding. So it's going to come in handy with the higher Charisma that we have. And speaking of that, for our third feat, we're going to go with ability improvement and raise up our charisma to 20. So now we could go over the equipment for Wyll, and when I tried to gear up Wyll, I mainly went for items that were going to increase my melee attacks or my Eldritch Blast, or just try to go for items that were going to give me higher armor class, spell save difficulty, and so forth. So we're going to go with the Birthright here for Act 3. This is going to get your charisma up to 22. You also have a lot of good options though for helmets, especially in Act 2 with Hat of Fire Acuity or Helmet of Arcane Acuity. Both of these are going to be very good if you want to go for more of a CC route, and use Hold Person and Hold Monster and so forth. You also have the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. A lot of popular builds like to use this one for Warlocks. I don't. I go with Ring of Arcane Synergy instead. I just feel like you get more benefits out of going with this for a ring slot. That way you can open that up for a different type of helmet, and there's a lot of good helmets out there for Warlocks. So Cloak of Protection here for the armor class. You also have Cloak of the Weave as an alternative. Potent Robe. This is an Eldritch Blaster's dream. And I really like adding this to this build. Not only is it a robe, so you can still get your Armor of Shadows going. That way you can get 19 armor class with this setup. But you also are not going to be one-dimensional like a lot of the other builds that use this. You're still going to get some very good melee damage, even on top of using Potent Robe, so just keep that in mind. You can also go for the Graceful Cloth or the Protecty Sparks Wall in Act 1 until you get the Potent Robe, and both of these are basically just robes, so you can still get Armor of Shadows to work with them and still increase your armor class up that way by +3. We're also going to go with the Hell Dust Gloves. This is mainly for the weapon attack damage, but you still get a nice bonus to spell attack rolls and spell save difficulty class. For the boots, we're going to go with Hell Dust Boots. This is mainly to ignore the effects of difficult terrain. That way you can go in and out of your Hunger of Adar very easily, traverse through that and not get slowed down, which is really what you want. That way you can go in, get some melee attacks, pop back out. You do also have the Boots of Genial Striding that's going to give you this same benefit that you can get earlier on in the game, or go for Evasive Shoes if you want to bump up your armor class even more. For the amulets, I go with Spine Shudder Amulet. This is mainly for the reverberation, but you really have so many good options with amulets. You can go for the Amulet of Greater Health, also Amulet of Harpers if you want to add shield to this build, or Amulet of Misty Step. That way you don't have to use a spell slot using Misty Step in a fight. For the rings, the best in slot ring is going to be Ring of Arcane Synergy. This is going to allow you to cast Eldritch Blast first, and then after that, you can get that nice bonus to your charisma added to your melee attacks. So it's really going to enhance your melee damage, and it's going to make you not one-dimensional where you're only casting Eldritch Blast 24/7 like a lot of other builds out there. So it's very important that we do get this. That way we add versatility to this build. I also go with Risky Ring. That way I have advantage on all of my attacks. Now this is going to hurt your Hunger of Hadar because you can easily break concentration. So if that is a problem for you, then you can go with Amulet of Greater Health. That way it's going to balance out the disadvantage. Or you can just swap out Risky Ring altogether, and you could go for other options like the Caustic Band, Killer Sweetheart, or Ring of Protection. It's really up to you, but I prefer to have Risky Ring on this build. So for our weapons, we're going to go with the Harmonic Dueler in the main hand that you get in Act 3, and the Infernal Rapier in the offhand that you get in Act 2. This is going to allow both of these weapons to scale with Charisma, because you cannot bind a weapon in your offhand, so it's not going to work that way, except for the fact that Infernal Rapier has a unique property where it's going to scale off of your spellcasting ability modifier, which is Charisma. So this will work out very well. Now you can go for the Charge-Bound Warhammer in Act 1. This is kind of going to be the best in slot for a Warlock because you can get the nice benefit of the lightning damage because you can bind this weapon in your main hand. So you can go with that until you get into Act 2, and then you can start dual wielding, and that way you can add the Charge-Bound Warhammer with the Infernal Rapier in your offhand until you get the Harmonic Dueler in Act 3. Now just keep in mind that the Harmonic Dueler has a unique ability called Mellow Harmony, which after you make a performance check, it's going to add your entire charisma modifier to the damage of all of your melee attacks. So it's going to really enhance your melee damage, and hence why I like to use this in Act 3. And then for the bow, we're just going to go with the Hellrider Longbow mainly for the initiative. Now you also can go for the Bow of Awareness if you want initiative early on in the game in Act 1. And then if you want to go for more of like a critical hit kind of build here, you can add the Deadshot, and that's going to enhance your criticals just a bit. And you're also going to have advantage with all of your attacks, so you can also go with this and have a pretty nice build. So now we could get into the fun stuff and do a complete showcase here featuring a Pure Fiend Warlock on Wyll. So I'm going to try to cover all bases, you know, melee attacks, range attacks, fireball, AoE CC, single target CC, basically everything. So I do have Elixir Bloodlust as well as Haste activated, so that way the fight goes by faster. Also have Harmonize on here, thanks to the Harmonic Dueler. I recommend using this prior to a fight, that way you don't have to spend an action on this while you are in combat. So now we could begin with Eldritch Blast. So you always want to start out a fight with Eldritch Blast, especially once you have Ring of Arcane Synergy. That way you can add the extra damage from your charisma to your melee attacks. So we might as well just go ahead and knock this enemy off into the water there, and then let's go ahead and attack this enemy here. And then from there, now we could go into Hunger of Hadar and basically shut these 4 enemies down. So I'm going to try to just center this one. And then what we can do is we can actually attack within Hunger of Hadar. So I'm going to use my offhand attack since now we do have Arcane Synergy added. So I'm just going to go for this archer right here. And then I'm going to head right back out. And now we could use a fireball. So let's go ahead and just light these 4 enemies up. And then if you do have another party member that has anything like spike growth or plant growth, or someone that has sleet storm or ice storm, all of these AoE CC moves work out very well combined with Hunger of Hadar. So in this example, I'm going to use Sleet Storm. And what Sleet Storm will do is basically create ice every single turn, which will keep these enemies locked into that Hunger of Hadar. So I'm just going to put this right here. And yeah, now these enemies are basically shut down. And if they aren't, anytime they try to run out of this, they're going to fall prone to the ice. So as you guys seen with this archer, once they start moving, they're just going to get knocked prone due to the ice on the ground that's within Hunger of Hadar. So this is very powerful because they have to spend half of their movement speed to get up after being knocked prone. So they're already going to be at a huge disadvantage trying to maneuver within Hunger of Hadar. And that is why I prefer Sleet Storm the most with Hunger of Hadar. So now what we can do with our Cambion and our Fire Elemental is actually attack outside of Hunger of Hadar. And with the spell attack rolls, you can gain advantage. So I'm just going to use my Cambion to attack this archer here. And because it is fire, what it'll do is it'll turn the ice into water. That's okay because Sleet Storm will put that ice back down in the next turn. So now we could go into our Fire Elemental and get a nice AoE Fireball. So I'm going to try to move this Fire Elemental up here and go ahead and do a nice little mini explosion. And now we could finish everything up in the next turn. So as you guys can see, the enemies just can't really do much once they get up from being knocked prone, other than just try to shove their allies out of Hunger of Hadar, which is nice. And that is why I love Sleet Storm in combination with Hunger of Hadar. So at this point, all we can do is just clean up here. So I'm going to start out with Eldritch Blast and just thank the enemies for shoving this enemy near the edge here. and use 2 beams on this enemy to guarantee my bloodlust. And at this point, we can just go ahead, take off Hunger of Adar, and I'm going to use an offhand attack on this enemy here. Generally, your offhand attacks are going to do about 30 plus damage, and your main hand attacks are going to do about an average of 40. I just decided to keep my action here to showcase that on the last enemy. So what I'm going to do here at this point is just use my Cambion and use Rays of Fire on this enemy to wrap this up. So now we'll go back into Wyll, and we can showcase Eye Bite. So Eye Bite is one of those unique spells where as long as you have a spell slot, it won't use your spell slot when you use it. So it's kind of a weird thing. If I didn't have an active spell slot here, then I couldn't use Eye Bite. But with Eye Bite, you can basically put enemies to sleep, and it will not use your spell slot. And you can use this constantly for 10 straight turns without using any other spell slot. So it's a pretty unique spell in that regard for a single target CC, or multiple targets if you keep using this every turn. So at this point, I'm just going to use my main attack here, get a nice free critical because the enemy was asleep, attack again, and then we will go back into our fire elemental and just finish the fight with a multi-attack. So I hope you guys enjoyed my Wyll Pure Fiend Warlock build, and I really love this build, mainly for the vibe that you get when you're playing with Wyll. And on top of that, this is a unique build where we're not just going to Eldritch Blast 24/7 like a lot of those other builds that you'll see out there. With this build, you truly are versatile, and you can do just as much damage with your melee attacks as you can with Eldritch Blast, and that's really what I love about this build. So let me know what you guys think about this one in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.